So it is 10 o'clock. I can see we have an audience of 22 online at the moment. I'm sure a few people will hop on as we do the intros, but in the spirit of trying to keep things to time, and whenever Oz and I start talking, things start to go off piece fairly quickly. But I just want to wish good morning to everybody that has come online with us this morning. Obviously, we would normally be doing a Louis Latour Agency's portfolio tasting. But obviously we can't do that this year, and so we were racking our brains as to what to replace it with, and we thought we'd come up with something, a day of webinars, and we're kicking this off by spending an hour in the lovely company of one of our friends, Mr. Oz Clarke. Needs no introduction, really, do you, Oz? Do you?
Well, it depends who's knocking on the door. I always call myself Charles Metcalfe when I answer the door.
So just on behalf of directors of Louis Latour Agencies, Will Oatley and Richard Nunn, I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and thank Oz for giving of his time today. We asked Oz to, he's a good friend of Louis Latour Agencies. We've done the 3 Wine Men tastings with Oz fairly regularly over the past few years when we were allowed to gather in person. And so we briefed Oz and we asked him to choose 6 wines from the portfolio that he found interesting, that he found surprising and delightful. And so over the next hour or so, 50 minutes or so, we're going to talk about those. Many of you have tasting packs, so please taste along with us. There is a chat function, there is a question function, so please interact with us. We'd love to hear your questions and comments. Yes, over to you, Oz. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate. Well, I think the first thing I better do is pour myself some wine. So this is I've noticed that the people coming on as panelists, none of them sounds like they've ever had a glass of wine before. So this is how you do it. Just let me get the branding right. There we are. Wine number 1 going into the glass. Great. Now, this Louis Latour thing, they're a fascinating operation because I've known them forever. And of course, they were founded in 1797. Wait, 1797. They actually have been growers in Burgundy since 1731, but they're not even the oldest. 1797 sounds old. Champy was 1720, but there isn't a Mr. Champy there anymore. Bouchard-Perry-Fils is 1731, but there isn't a Mr. Bouchard there anymore. Chanson were there 1750. There's no Mr. Chanson there anymore, but Louis Latour is still run by a Latour. 11 generations, and Louis Fabrice Latour, the present guy, is the 7th guy who's been called Louis Latour. So they've got 50 hectares of vineyards in Burgundy, and frankly, an amazing amount of that is Grand Cru. They started acquiring their vineyards in Allos-Corton in 1768, and they've now got 9.65 hectares of Cote Charlemagne. They've got 17.1 hectares of Coton. That's 26.7 hectares of one Grand Cru. It's pretty spectacular. Look, that's the traditional side. But what I want to talk about today is the fact that they've always been amazingly innovative. Now, let's look at a few points. And I'm going back 150, 170 years here. The 3rd Louis was the first person in Burgundy to realize you could defeat phylloxera by grafting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay onto American rootstocks, which is exactly what he did. And of course, nobody else was doing it. So their vineyards are all dying. He, I have to say, bought quite a few vineyards very cheaply, including Coton Conseil, which he immediately replanted in the 1890s with rootstock. Secondly, they absolutely led the way in planting Chardonnay on the limestone soils of what is now Cote Charlemagne. When they started doing this, Pinot Noir and Aligoté aligoté. There was aligoté in Cote Charlemagne until very recently. There may still be, but Louis Latour paved the way to make it a white-only Grand Cru Cote Charlemagne. Oh, a very important technical thing. They constructed concrete channels to collect soils washed down those steep Corton slopes in those frequent savage rainstorms. And I've been there. I've watched this torrent of brown orange water pouring off the slopes. And that's all Grand Cru soil, otherwise just escaping into the municipal drains. Well, not at Louis Latour, it's not. It's all Grand Cru soil, which is then carted back up into the Grand Cru vineyards. And by the way, their winery in Alos-Corton, 19th century winery, gravity fed right from the start. That was revolutionary stuff. They were pioneers in oak as well. They were the first people to actually buy their own sections of oak forest in the Allier, so that all the barrels come from their own oak, seasoned in their own yards. And of course, they have their own cooperage at Savigny. And now let's go into the 20th century, Ardèche. They planted 350 hectares of Ardèche in 1979. They were the first to expand outside of all the negotiations outside Burgundy. Drouin went to Oregon in 1987. Latour went to Ardèche in 1979, and to be honest, Ardèche is now so much of just a part of the furniture at Louis Latour. We don't realize quite how revolutionary that was, because they said that they desperately needed somewhere to find, as Louis Latour said, he wanted a Macon-like, Burgundy-like white wine, and he went and found, instead of the cheaper stuff down in the Aude and the Hérault, he went and found a hillside, clay limestones, not Burgundian but classic Chardonnay conditions, neither north nor south, lots of Mistral, no humidity problems, warm but with the wind and the height, simply fabulous Chardonnay land, 1979. And sustainability in general has been a real point with Louis Latour for a long time. They've got a lot of organic and biodynamic operations on the Louis Latour portfolio. They've got people like McHenry Honan, they've got people like Pyramid Valley, Wakefield. Wakefield's 80 Acres, for instance, is the first carbon neutral wine brand. So, you know, it's important to Louis Latour. But actually in Burgundy, they've had an organic philosophy there for 20 years. No insecticides, no herbicides, no chemical fertilizer, horse ploughing, leaving the vineyards fallow at replanting, mulching all the vine cuttings. They've got beehives in the Cote Charlemagne, which is presumably why the Cote Charlemagne is getting sweeter. Never mind. Sorry. But this philosophy does run right through. So I tell you what, let's get on to some wine, because otherwise you will lose the will to live. And the first wine that I've chosen is from Simonnet-Febvre. And it's, you've got a label, it's Auxerois, it's Cote de l'Auxerois. And some of you may know this, but quite a few of you may not. Well, let's just open the wine and have a swig. By the way, whenever we go to a new wine, do pour yourself some stuff. Have a swig of it. Don't wait for me. Anyone who knows me well knows that you'll wait till the Sahara turns into a.
I'll nudge you when we all get a bit too thirsty.
So here we are. Here's the first wine. It's an Auxerrois from the Cote de l'Auxerois.
So interesting point about Simonnet-Febvre, which I think you're going to talk about, is that they make Crémant de Bourgogne. They were first known for making sparkling Chablis, but actually the purchase of the gravity-fed winery that Louis Latour bought in the late 1800s was toasted with a case of the Simonnet-Febvre Crémant, equivalent of Crémant de Bourgogne. So there's a weird sort of symmetry there.
How interesting!
That
Fantastic.
Simonnet-Febvre is now part of the Maison.
Yeah. because I think the thing about Simonnet-Febvre is they've been around since 1840. They're famous for classic Chablis. They've got vineyards around the town of Chablis. They've got significant holdings, above all, in that super first growth Mont-de-Milieu and in the Grand Cru Les Preux. And they've also got an organic range of Chablis and Premier Cru. And as Kate said, you know, they are probably the leading textbook Crémant de Bourgogne producers. So they are a classic operator. But this century hasn't been easy for Chablis, particularly the last decade, with all kinds of afflictions, but above all, frost, decimating crops. I mean, just in 2016, for instance, Simonnet-Febvre lost 60% of their crop. Well, Latour had purchased Simonnet-Febvre in 2003, seeing it as a like-minded operation, family negociant, high-quality core of Domaine vineyards in top sites, that kind of stuff. But by 2013, Louis Fabrice Latour, he saw not only a need to find other supplies because of chronic crop shortages, but he also saw an opportunity. There wasn't a lot of possibility of expanding in Chablis, but in the surrounding area, the opportunities were enormous. Why? How? Well, the greater Chablis area is called either the Auxerois or the Yonne. They're fairly similar. Before the phylloxera scourge of the 19th century, the Yonne was the largest wine producing area in all of France. Nearly 50,000 hectares were vineyards. And at the time of the French Revolution in 1789, these were highly regarded vineyards, and they provided wines for Paris and much further north, and they had a range of extremely decent grape varieties. Grape varieties. Well, there's one grape variety that we should all blame for the collapse of the Yonne, the Gouais Blanc. Now, its only redeeming feature is its gross promiscuity. It's the parent of over 80 different grape varieties, including most famously Chardonnay and Riesling, but it's an awful grape. The first time anyone wrote about it, it was called the Scheißtrauben, the shit grape. That's what they called it in 400 years ago. Its berries were very big, very juicy, and tasteless, and you could make vast amounts of completely forgettable wine. Well, sadly, that is exactly what the Yonne vineyard started doing. They planted Gouais, quantity over quality. Actually, Auxerre's most infamous vineyard was called Clos Migraine, which just about tells you what that was like. But Paris still bought until the railway line from Paris to the Mediterranean opened in 1855, and the Yonnes and the Auxerois' job of providing Paris with its basic wine was finished within a season, as trainloads of much more powerful, throaty wines swept up the tracks from the south. And the phylloxera aphid finished off the job. An entire vineyard of almost 50,000 hectares died. Only in the heart of Chablis and in a few tiny pockets totaling less than 40 hectares did the great swell of the Auxerrois vineyard survive. But the land was still there, now frequently turned over to cattle. They have an appellation contrôlée for their beef, which was proving much more profitable than the vines. And Louis Fabrice, he just realized the land was cheap. Climate change was making ripening a relatively simple matter. And as he said, when he found the high valleys of the Auxerois, now that's a little subsection of the Yonne, southeast of Chablis, he said, this could be the Chablis of 30 years ago. Tasty, fresh, underpriced for its quality. And that's exactly what they've done. It is classic Louis Latour behavior. The Auxerois in its soil is similar to the Cote de Beaune. Its southern tip of the Auxerois, by the way, is only 12 kilometers west of Beaune itself. And the soils of this vineyard for this wine are the same clay limestone layer as Montley, just above Chablis. So, I mean, they bought a chunk of the few remaining vines, and then they set out to plant more, and they aim to have 60 hectares in all, and that is more than twice as many as the whole area possessed 10 years ago. And the grapes they've chosen: Pinot Gris, Auxerois, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. And I must admit, I think the Auxerois is the best. The Auxerrois is a sort of Pinot Blanc lookalike. It's actually the second most planted grape variety in Alsace, but it's usually blended away. Well, every variety finds somewhere it can excel, and maybe the Auxerrois finds that place in the Coteaux de l'Auxerrois. So let's have another swig of this.
I think it's delicious, and it's opening up very nicely in the glass.
What I like is it's genuinely earthy. It's not got all this nonsense of sort of artificial minerality sulfides. It's properly earthy. It's got an appetizing, fresh terroir, if you can use that word, really, and yet it's got lots of fruit. And it's got green peach and golden gauge and ripe green apples, and it's almost slightly waxy. It's quite different to Chablis. It's quite different to Burgundy. It's quite different to Alsace Auxerrois. It's even slightly chewy.
And the vineyards are amazing. They are on these, as you say, beautiful, beautiful slopes, overlooking these kind of bucolic pastures with cows and grazing and wheat and so on. And
they've got a lovely mountain to the north, which is 430 meters. Got a lovely mountain to the south, 430 meters. You're only just half a mile away from the Aramos River, which heads up to the Yonne. You've got the Canal de Bourgogne a few miles over there. And that's what you can see exactly why. I mean, there were 5,000 hectares in the Auxerrois alone at its height. So it was a significant part of the Yonne, 10% of the Yonne, 8 to 10% of the Yonne, 10 to 12% of the Yonne. That's like mathematics. Too early.
And it's almost right. Just to sort of place people, it's sort of direct. It's almost halfway between Dijon and Chablis, really, as the kind of crow flies.
Yeah, it is.
And the other interesting thing about this vineyard is everything that Louis Latour and Simonnet-Febvre bought was actually grown on the Lyre. So you have these incredible Lyre type vineyards, which you really just don't see very often.
But in Uruguay,
so
one or two very good people in Cote use it. Odds and sods on. I mean, it's supposed to be extremely good. It's all to do with shading and to do with food exposure and to do with dealing with vigor. And they say that the Loire, I mean, Geneva double curtain, they say, is very good for dealing with very powerful vigor. And the Loire is very good for sort of medium vigor. I would have thought Uruguay was pretty high vigor myself, but there are guys in places like the Cote de Blaye in Bordeaux who make fantastic efforts with it. You need a bit of hard work on it, and as the vines get older, it gets more problematic. But it certainly produces good fruit results.
So I think people are enjoying it. There's definitely notes of a salty tang coming through, which I think is definitely there. And Andy Howard has asked what the price is. This doesn't have much in the way of retail availability at this point, but it would be low to mid-teens. So 13, 14 pounds a bottle, I think retail would be roughly where this sits. So interesting choice, Oz. I think
I love it.
Yeah.
Should we move on to Banfi?
Let's move on to Banfi. What's the other one I have?
Is it La Pettegola?
Pettegola. So Italians always put the emphasis on the last syllable. So it's the Pettegola. And there we are. We can see it up on our screens there. It means it's the name of a seabird, a redshank. But in the local dialect also, it means sort of the town gossip, a chatterbox or a chatty, I hate to be sexist, but a chatty woman. So it has two meanings. It means a redshank, and I think the redshank has a sort of chattering song, which is where the little name comes from.
Well, I have to say, in terms of having a glass of wine at this time of the morning, this is fantastic. honestly, the what's happening with Vermentino in right through the Maremma and also in Bulgari, I really think is a powerful movement, and I think this is a really good a good example. It's got a perfume quality to it. It is slightly saline, which is one of the important things about Vermentino, but it's brilliantly drinkable. So I tell you what, here, since we're talking about tales of the unexpected, let's just have a look at Banfi, because this wine is another wine completely outside the box, because Banfi have made their reputation as providers of serious, ripe, oaked, powerful reds from their extensive vineyards in Montalcino, and these are Brunellos and Super Tuscan blends, both of them, and that is the engine room of high quality Tuscan red, and the explosion of interest in Montalcino can frankly, in the last generation, can be substantially put down to the arrival of the Mariani family in Montalcino from the USA in 1978. And by 1983, they'd built a vast estate of 2,830 hectares. That is the largest contiguous estate in Europe. The Marianis called Castello Banfi their impossible dream. Well, given that there were only 100 hectares of vines in Montalcino when the Marianis arrived, you can see they created a bit of a stir, especially so because they didn't initially just plant Sangiovese. They planted massive amounts of Moscadello. But before you laugh, Moscadello, traditionally, hundreds of years ago, was the normal grape in Montalcino, not Sangiovese. So the Marianis did sort of know what they were doing. But this sure as hell woke Montalcino up. And since the Marianis were the biggest wine importers in America, their Brunello, when they made it, headed straight to the States. And so it created a massive interest in Brunello, where very little had existed before. So the locals may have huffed and puffed, and I'm sure they did, but they can now huff and puff inside an Alfa Romeo instead of on the back of a bicycle.
Yes,
anyway, why have we got a white wine? And where's it from? Montalcino? No. It's from the Vermentino grape, and it's from the Tuscan coastal area, the Maremma, with just a little bit of Bulgari. Bulgari, isn't that where Sassicaia comes from, where Ornellaia comes from? Yes, and these are the current coastal superstars, and they're big and dark and red. Yes, but it is possible the future star could be white, because no less a visionary than Angelo Gaia told me that in the medium term, he sees the future of Italy as white, not red. And the first person to offer me a glass of Maremma Vermentino and say, here, try this, was Piero Antinori. Well, those two guys know a future trend when they see one. Well, so do the Marianis, because they've been involved with various sorts of wine. Wait for it. Lambrusco, coolers, blushes, fizzes. But the point is, they've always been first in, so that they can ride the wave. And so when they decided to move up market, that is exactly what they did with Montalcino, seeing where it could go, riding the wave upwards. And if they decide that Vermentino is the next big thing, well, don't bet against them. But in a way, it's back to the future, because the original Bulgari DOC was for white and pink wines only. The locals said reds won't ripen. And anyway, the locals, they didn't drink their own wines if they could help it. They said they tasted of salt. Well, what is the hallmark of Vermentino? Salinity. This is a grape that needs the sea breezes to thrive. The closer you get to the coast, all the way from Liguria in the north, right down to the Roman Lazio in the south, the more the northwesterly wind blows as you get closer to the coast, and the saltier the wines become. And there is some very good inland Vermentino on some volcanic tufa, but the future is on those sandy seaside soils, sometimes streaked with chalk, where the reds won't ripen. And the Maremma IGT, which was established with reds in mind, is now 30% Vermentino. So now this here, well, it's you could say it's really simply made. It's high yields in the vineyards. It's machine harvested. It's got a cool, straightforward stainless steel fermentation. They've fined it. They've given it sterile filtration. There's 4 grams of sugar in it. There's 6 grams of acid. It's got a screw cap. They've bottled it, and now we're drinking it. It's sort of, that's it. And it shows that a modern, mechanized type of wine can be absolutely delicious. And indeed, pretty serious wine commentators in Italy are now saying that Vermentino could be the next Sauvignon Blanc. Well, perhaps it can. Let's just want to have one more mouthful of this.
Yeah, I get a sort of almost orange flower, orangey sort of. There's a hint of something there for me, which I think is also...
You're right. It's a citrus flower, isn't it? It's
yes.
That lovely world of sort of orange flower, lemon flower, not the actual oil itself. There is, even though it hasn't really had much, it's got a little bit of lees on it probably, but it hasn't been given all the heavy treatment, but it has got lees weight to it. I mean, there is a little bit of oatmeal somewhere in there, which is delightful. The acid is absolutely delightful. There's a slightly salted, toasted, hazelnutty quality, which is that saline thing coming through. But it's the fruit and the acid and the freshness and the sheer drinkability, which I think is tremendous. But by the way, just talking about sustainability, it's worth mentioning with Banfi, talking of trends again, that they do have put their back into sustainability in a fairly serious way, and also research. They've done tons of research on Sangiovese, for instance. They found 650 clones of Sangiovese on their estate alone. And so they've been researching all that sort of stuff. They are always experimenting with densities and with trellising and this kind of stuff. They've also taken this whole global warming thing in Tuscany really seriously, and they're planting all kinds of heat-resistant varieties to see which ones are going to work. They've developed a fascinating new stainless steel oak hybrid vat system. Oh, they've reduced their bottle weight by 40% since 2009. That is an awful lot of tons of glass that don't have to be made anymore. They've reduced their vineyard water by 80%. I mean, Banfi are an impressive operation. You don't have to think too much about the old Lambrusco and the old Blush, but the modern Banfi is a pretty serious
one of the cleanest and most beautiful wineries I've ever been. And we had the honor when we visited to be shown around by John Mariani, who is extremely tall and very deaf. And we literally, as little munchkins, ran around the winery behind him while he strode forth, showing us all his favourite corners and telling us all sorts of stories. So it's a wonderful place to visit. Of course, they've got the most beautiful hotel there. They've got their own balsamery to make their own balsamic vinegar. They make their own pasta. They make their own honey. They're the largest producer of dried plums in the whole of Italy. So it's prunes. They're beautiful. If you like prunes, they are absolutely amazing. So it's an incredible operation. And
they're delicious. Yeah, the first time I went there, I think I had about a 12-course meal. I mean, Montalcino knocks the food into you in a fairly heavy rate anyway, but this just never stopped.
Actually, they're at the back end of last year, it sort of slightly went under the radar, but their Sala di Grappoli restaurant got its first Michelin star at the end of last year. So when we are allowed to visit, which hopefully will be soon, we can go and taste our way and drink our way around.
I'm sure the wine. Some of the participants are already noting down your email, Kate, saying,
"Indeed,
I was on your webinar. Any chance of a visit?" It is worth it. You know, it's a very different Montalcino, but it's a completely different Montalcino from the sort of the tiny, trendy sort of single vineyard stuff. But it's a really important part of Montalcino as well. So let's move on to another. I'm
just going to do a slight housekeeping for anyone interested. This wine would retail from about sort of £13.5 up to about 16, mid-teens again. So just to mention that. Now I have the next wine as the Cote de Rhone.
Vidal-Fleury or Vidal or Vidal? You got Vidal-Fleury.
Vidal-Fleury.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I've got my New Zealand hat on from Vidal-Fleury, Cote de Rhone, 2019. And here we are again. We've got a renowned red wine producer, this time Vidal-Fleury, founded in 1781, oldest continually operating wine producer in the Rhone Valley, all that stuff. And actually until 1976, it had a pretty fearsome reputation for the big, strong, dark Rhone reds, sort of à la méthode ancienne. In other words, they might start out as tough as old boots, but you give them 10, 20, 30 years and they turned into something rather wonderful. Well, in 1976, Joseph Vidal-Fleury, who'd been making the wines for 68 years, he died, and the company foundered very quickly. I sort of vaguely remember it, because they survived almost by force of will, because there was almost no market for their types of wine anymore. I mean, Côte Rôtie and Condrieu were their local specialities. And nobody wanted them. Nobody even knew what they were. You got more money for a kilo of apricots than a kilo of Côte Rôtie grapes. And I remember on my first visit to Vidal-Fleury, I think I was with Metcalfe actually, in the 1980s. The wines were pretty poor and they were hard and they were sour-lipped. So I remember I went for a lunch at a little local restaurant in Vienne and I ordered a small jug of the house white and it was delicious. I said, "What is it?" "Condrieu," said the waiter. "No one wants it." So I ordered a jug of the house red and it was fabulous. And what was it? Côte Rôtie, the waiter said. "Nobody wants it." Well, things changed massively for the Rhone and for Vidal-Fleury when Etienne and Marcel Guigal got to work, because Etienne had his first job with Vidal-Fleury in 1927, and he took an intense delight in buying the decrepit but famous Vidal-Fleury business in 1984. And and Vidal-Fleury immediately combined their vineyard holdings of Côte Rôtie. That was 12 hectares in total. That was 35% of all the Côte Rôtie in 1984. And that shows how little wine drinkers cared for what is now one of the world's most sought after wines from a vineyard, which so far are covering 310 hectares. Well, look, our wine is white, and this is where Guigal's ownership of Vidal-Fleury really pays off. Both companies make a Côte de Rhone. They're both excellent. They're fleshy, they're fruity, they're mouth-filling, but they have different grape compositions with the one crucial characteristic they both share, and that is that Viognier is the dominant grape. Now, this Côte de Rhone white in the Rhone, it's mostly been pretty dull stuff until in 1989, Guigal became the first person to buy some Southern Viognier from the Gard, and he bought 10,000 litres of Viognier to blend into his Côte de Rhone white. And that was honestly the beginning of Côte de Rhone white being a fabulous drink. And it would be facile to think that Vidal-Fleury didn't benefit from these contacts in vineyards of Guigal's and didn't share the fruit, but they know exactly where to get the grapes from. They get them from the two communes of Chustlan and Laudun. These are two of the four first communes ever classified with their own names in the Rhone. These are on the west coast of the Rhone, not on the popular, famous east coast. They're on the west coast of the River Rhone, and they're opposite Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but they're much, much higher, about 250 meters as against something more like 100 meters is typical in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. They're much cooler. They're on sandy, granitic soils, and these soils at Chustlan and Laudun have always had a reputation of producing the Southern Rhone's best whites. And I think this is, again, a fabulous, really opinionated flavored wine. You absolutely get the Rhone in it, and it's got a viscosity and a lovely apricot peach lift, which really shows the Viognier as it should be, not over made, not given tons of oak, not have over ripened, because a lot of Viognier is over. You've got to ripen Viognier, but you mustn't over-ripen it because you lose all the aroma. I think this is tremendous. It's also, I think it's got Grenache Blanc. Gosh, I can't remember what the other. It's Grenache Blanc and sorry,
and a dash of Roussanne. A
dash
of Roussanne.
Roussanne and Grenache Blanc.
Yeah.
But a lot of Viognier, and I think it's beautifully done. And
it's about, I think it's 95%. I'm let me find out. I don't think it says on my tech sheet, but it's about 95% Viognier.
Yeah. Whereas Guigal is more likely to be something like 60-65%.
Something like that.
But Guigal will throw in Bourbon and Claret and God knows what into it as well. But I think that the general idea, I think that as negociants, both Guigal and Vidal-Fleury have taken the same approach to this, to keep a genuine lush Rhone quality to it, but make it fabulously drinkable. And I think that they both do a tremendous job. Honestly, if you're looking for sort of restaurant white, bar white, when you're going around the country and think, where am I? And you're not in too adventurous a mood. When I go to bars, I'm afraid I'm in an adventurous mood normally. I think, okay, I'm going to have one of everything by the glass and see where I end up. But this is the kind of bottle you just say, have it. And I hope that Vidal-Fleury Cote de Rhone Red is now doing the same thing, because of course Guigal's Cote de Rhone Red has been doing that for 30 years. Anyway,
they've got the most amazing winery now. Super modern winery, and
I haven't been. Yeah, but the other one was a creaking. I mean, the other one could have come out of a Hammer horror film. I'm astonished that Harry Potter's lot didn't decide to take it on to put us in the science laboratory for Hogwarts.
So retail price for that would be about 12 quid.
Okay.
So
I think that's a delightful wine, and thank you, Kate, because I haven't tasted it for a few years, and thank you for bringing me back to it, because I must admit, those southern whites are becoming more and more important. Partly, not just Viognier. Viognier is often terribly important to provide the sweetness, the ripeness, the beauty, the perfume, all those things, the flesh. But there's an awful lot that the other southern red whites are now starting to do. And in a warming world, we need to understand what those southern whites can do. Funny, Viognier, we've been trying for 30 or 40 years to understand what Viognier is really best at. Maybe we're finally getting there.
I think.
What about the next one?
We're moving to Chile now, aren't we?
Beautiful label. This is Manent Chardonnay Gran Reserva, 2019. And I must admit, here we are again in a really tremendous glass of wine, because Manent is a fantastic operation. It's in Chile, but it is famous above all for one particular style of wine, and that's big, powerful reds, especially from Malbec. Yeah, Malbec in Chile. They've got vines there which are well over 100 years old. And of course, Manent is in Colchagua, an area of Chile that is known above all for one style of wine, big, powerful, ripe reds, often with a gentle, warming texture, but very, very red. And our Manent is white. Well, Colchagua's reputation has largely been built around the vineyards of Apalta, Santa Cruz, and Cunaco. Now, these range from fairly warm to positively boiling. The soils range from virtually pure rock on parts of Apalta through to rich, fertile valley floors where the water table is only sometimes a meter deep. I've actually stood in those vineyards with some of the locals, and they picked up crayfish from the vineyards. I mean, that might be all right for big volume reds, but it is not okay for fresh, incisive whites. So when a new generation took over Manent at the beginning of the century, they realized that just staying in the warm center of Colchagua wasn't an option. So first they planted new vineyards out west at Peralillo. Now, the grapes there ripened a week later than Cunaco. That's good. But Manent knew that they needed somewhere the grapes would ripen a month later. They had to go to the coast, to Litueche, right up towards the Rappel River as it sweeps down from Lake Rappel to the sea, to vines that are up to 330 meters high on granitic gravel soils, sharing the barren land with wind farms and very little else. Ah, wind. Chile, well, many of you will know Chile's 2,670 miles long. It's 110 miles wide at its widest, and it goes from the Atacama Desert in the north, which is the driest place on earth. In fact, they found mummified human remains there, thousands of years old, in perfect condition, because in many parts of it, they think it has never rained. And it goes right the way down to the edge of the Antarctic in the south. And all the way along that 2,670-mile coast, the Humboldt Current is an icy Antarctic current that runs up the side of Chile. Well, the thing about that is that every time a river goes down from the Andes, and obviously there are quite a few of those, goes down from the Andes, breaks out through the coastal range of mountains out to the sea, it creates a valley or it creates a wind tunnel, because as the center of Chile warms up every day, hot air rises. That's what science says. Nature abhors a vacuum. That's what science says. So as the hot air rises up there, the air has to be replaced. Well, you can't replace it from the Andes. There's 30,000 feet of Andes up there. The only place you can replace this from is from the west. And that means that every one of these river valleys becomes a wind tunnel, because the air from the sea is sucked into the center of Chile to actually take the place of the hot air that's risen up there. Well, just off the Chilean coast, as I said, is the Humboldt Current. It's icy cold. I honestly, I've been swimming in Viña del Mar. I've done it once. Even I, and I'm a brave swimmer, won't be doing it again. It is icy cold, which means that all the air that is sitting on the top of the sea is icy cold. So that means that every day when it is dragged inland by the vacuum created inland up these river valleys, it's icy cold, and the warmer it gets inland, the colder and the harsher the wind gets. And in an area here at Letuiche, we're in an area that might get 320 days sun a year. And so this mix of wind and, by way of sea fog, in the mornings and sometimes in the evenings too, this keeps the average daytime summer temperature to just 25 degrees centigrade. Now we get that in England. So that is right the way down the coast. This is going to be the secret of the new Chile. Also going up the Andes, by the way, but that's another, well, this isn't the one we've got, but there's a fantastic move to the coast now in Chile, and it's producing thrilling wines right from the Atacama Desert to 12, 14, 1,500 miles down further south. And I think this is absolutely smashing. It's whole bunch pressed. They use 40% of old French barrels to barrel ferment it, and then they've left it for not very long, 6 months, something like that. 60% of it has been in stainless steel, and then that's been aged in stainless steel again for about 6 months. They do stirring on it. I think quite reasonably. They use cultured yeast. I'm actually a great fan of proper use of cultured yeast. I think at the moment they've been given a bad rap, but I'm sure that their use will quietly come back into favor fairly soon. So again, I think this is saline. I think it's waxy. I think the acid is quite strong, but again, it's this lovely mixture of apple and peach and hazelnut toast. It feels to me maritime. It's almost got toasted toast crust as well. It's just a great example of why Chile makes, to me, some of the world's best and most affordable Chardonnays. So, Kate, give us the commercial on this.
So commercially, this would be selling out at about £14-15, something like that. So yeah, lovely quality, beautiful. I get this lovely sort of almost toasted pineapple, kind of beautiful, juicy. Yeah,
toasted pineapple, good tasting, madam. Yes, that's absolutely right, because that gives you that slightly burnt but sweet,
Yes.
very slightly caramelized thing. And on a fruit, because I sometimes talk about rice pudding and the edge of rice pudding, or burnt jam on my mum's jam tarts, those sorts of things. That kind of burnt, which of course, it's not pejorative, it's delicious.
Delicious, yeah.
But roasted pineapple, toasted roasted pineapple, good tasting that, yeah. And because those caramelly things, those slightly burnt things are a joy. They're an absolute joy. Baked isn't, great big beefy overcooked baked exhausted lumps of X fruit are not enjoyable at all. But no one ever told me that rice pudding was better for not having a bit of burnt on it. It's always better for having a bit of burnt on it.
Are the best bits.
Who eats rice pudding nowadays? Right. Move on to
right. Let's move on to the Pinot Noir Valmoissine from Louis Latour. Sorry, I'm clanking glasses this end. It's a joy to actually get to taste for once, which is lovely. So I have mine here. I actually poured mine a little earlier and it's opening up beautifully in the glass.
That is a really good point, Kate, because I noted on this, tasting it several times, it should be decanted or opened and aired. I think it can take it and it actually wants it. And that may be because it's been largely, it's not an oaked wine. And that's also a very interesting concept for this. I also think you shouldn't chill it down too much. There's a bit of a, it depends which month of the year we're in, but there's always an idea that you can chill down Pinot Noir quite a lot. Well, you can, but I actually don't think that this one particularly needs it. I think that an ordinary room temperature is better.
Yeah, but I actually gave all my samples 30 minutes in the fridge before we began this this exercise. And Joe Gosling has mentioned that he found it a bit funky. So did I. When I first poured it, I thought it was ever so slightly, little hint of reduction, but it went almost immediately. Give it a shake. As it's been
shake. It doesn't need a copper coin. It just needs a shake.
Yeah.
So let's just think about this Domaine de Valmoissine. Of course, we're tasting Louis Latour wines today, so we've got to taste some red Burgundy. Well, from their vineyards around the Cote de Beaune that they've owned and nurtured since 1731. Yes, we have to see what they do with Pinot Noir. Well, of course we do, but we don't have to taste a Burgundy. It's just that these grapes have not been growing in vineyards since 1731, and they haven't been grown in Burgundy. These grapes are growing on land that had never hosted a vine before 1990. And these vineyards are in the Coteaux de Verdun. Well,
quite.
It's a classic example of why Louis Latour, from the battlements of Burgundy, steeped in tradition, was such a radical thinker. Because in 1979, as I said earlier, he saw that there was a demand for good Burgundy-like whites, which Burgundy simply couldn't consistently supply. And that's when he found the limestone slopes of the Ardèche, and he planted his 350 hectares of Chardonnay there. But that was 1979. In 1989, again, still really early, he found that he was faced with the impossibility of regularly supplying a reasonable quality, basic red Burgundy. And so he rejected what he called the gospel of the appellation. He said, we take our grape varieties wherever they can be grown to make quality wine. That doesn't sound like a Burgundian talking. And he said the key element is that Pinot Noir should be affordable and consistent in quality and price. Well, that's something it's extremely difficult to do in the Côte d'Or in Burgundy. So in 1990, he began to plant in this gorgeous garrigue and pine-scented forest wilderness. About an hour's drive north of Saint-Tropez. Kate and I have been talking about it because Kate's a great cyclist. And this is one of those areas that you dream of when you're in the hurly-burly of the south coast. An hour or so's north, you're in an idyll.
It's idyllic.
And so my immediate sense about this was we go on and on about somewhereness nowadays, quite rightly, and about whether a wine has a sense of place or not. Well, does this have a sense of place? Okay, well, these vineyards are just south of the Gorge de Verdon. They actually call it the Grand Canyon de Verdon. It's a most astonishing place, and it is the deepest and it's the most thrilling gorge in the whole of Europe. This vineyard is just south of the Corniche Sublime, the sublime Corniche.
Oh, you're making me want to go there right now, Oz.
The sublime Corniche. And we can borrow your Rolls Royce Corniche, can we, Kate? Or in the garage?
Of course, when it's out of the garage.
Was us putting the tires back on. And this vineyard is just outside Ops. Now, Ops is the truffle hunting capital of Provence. This is getting a sense of place to it. And if this 100-hectare site was indeed a virgin site, everyone says it was virgin land. Well, maybe, but it's right next to where there was a monastery in 900. And if there's a monastery, you normally think, could be some vines there somewhere. Well, Louis XIV, in the 17th, 18th century, he was pretty fond of Provençal Pinot Noir. So there is a sense of place about this, and I'm sure that any of you heading south should just make the day tour. The Malkovich wine is a little further over and up. He's in a place called the Little Siberia. It's cold. It's cold, and that's why he says planting Pinot Noir not a problem. The guys from Miraval have planted just along from Valmoissine as well. So you've got some sense that Provence, at long last, is beginning to think, why were we famous a long time ago? Where did it all go? We can do better than just providing rosé for the masses. And indeed they can. And I think this is a really, really good example, because now these vines are on clay soil, clay limestones. The clay limestones, really, they said they're really pretty similar to the Burgundian ones. I suspect they are. The vines are at 500 meters. Now that's twice as high as Cote in Burgundy, but the grapes ripen at the same time as Cote. That's probably because A, height, and B, because despite the sun is shining in a pretty regular way, the Mistral blows across these high fields for 6 to 9 days at a time. God, I know that Mistral, it cools everything down. And the winemaking couldn't be more simple. They keep the vines yields are low. That's fine. Although I think you can go too low on things, but I think that these are sort of actually Grand Cru low, 35 hectolitres per hectare. That's pretty low. The grapes are destemmed. They're given a 4 or 5 day fermentation. Nothing smart and complicated. They're fermented in open stainless steel, and then they're left in stainless steel vats for 12 months. No oak, no frills, just the essence. And I must admit, I think this is tremendous. And in a way, it's a sort of a new way of looking at French Pinot Noir, because the flavor immediately, there's a wonderful smell coming off the wine now. It's been in the glass for 10 minutes. And the flavors are sort of, they've got things like cranberry in the right way, plum skins in the right way, dry strawberry flavors. And again, a little bit of saline coming through. The last 2 or 3 years, we've all been picking up saline a lot more. I don't know whether everything's changed or we've just looking for another flavor, but there's saline in this as well. Good minerality, proper minerality, not sort of smart ass minerality, proper minerality. And I must admit, a little bit of smokiness. It's a limpid wine. You're looking at it's limpid, it's transparent. And I think that's a wonderful thing for a Pinot Noir to be. We haven't talked much about food pairings today, but I did notice from the Jamaica Observer that they reckon that this wine will go extremely well with braised local root beer goat.
Well, I shall try it tonight.
Good. I think we better head on to our last wine.
Crack on. We've stunned everybody to silence in the fact that they were talkative at the start, but they've I think they must be enjoying the wine so much and you talking
or
so
asleep.
Much
It's all just on me. They're either happy or asleep.
So final wine. We've chosen wines all the way through that are lovely and affordable, because the Valmoissine would be £12 to £14, but this last wine is a punt into something a little bit more aspirational, shall we say. This would retail for about £45 a bottle, I think. So this is a treat.
But it is an absolute smasher. This is called Cantera, and it's from Smith and Sheth, and it's what they call cru, and the label says cru, which in French means that special bit of terroir, and in small print underneath the cru, it says vineyards of exceptional quality. Well, Steve Smith is the Smith part of Smith and Sheth. He's probably the greatest vineyard expert in New Zealand. He knows every vineyard in New Zealand. And the thing about Steve is he loves flavor. He is not an ideologue. I mean, fashions come and go, but Steve continues to pursue his goals, which are the best grapes, not the ripest grapes, not the most alcoholic, not the tiniest yield, but the best balanced grapes at the best level of maturity from the most suitable vineyard sites, which will give the best flavored wine. Now, that's where this whole cru idea comes from, vineyards of exceptional quality. Well, in New Zealand, the Maoris there's a Kiwi word, let's say, for terroir, and that word is Turanjawiwe, or Turanjawewe, Turanjawiwi, Turanjawewe. And what this means is a special place where one feels connected and empowered. Of all the so-called ex-colonial countries in our new world of wine, be they English-speaking or Spanish-speaking, New Zealand is the one where the wine world has most enthusiastically embraced the cultures of the people who lived there when the Europeans arrived. And the Maori culture of the land is a fantastic culture. It gives enormous importance to this specialness of a place and the spiritual and the emotional strength that place can give. Because in some countries, you feel that the wine world is at odds with the ancient cultures that existed before they arrived, but not in New Zealand, not when you're dealing with someone like Steve Smith, who's spent 35 years forging a relationship with the land of his nation. So Smith and Sheth call themselves contemporary negotiants. Brian Sheth is also very keen on Turanjawewe, just like Steve Smith. He spent much of his life and much of his passion on wildlife conservation. And altogether, I think they make a really fantastic pair. But let's just look at this wine, because it's Gimlet Gravels. It's in Hawke's Bay. So what what are the gimlet gravels? Okay, I'll give you my experience of them, because Hawke's Bay is on the east side of the North Island, and it was traditionally the only place in New Zealand that you could ripen Cabernet Sauvignon. So they called it New Zealand's Bordeaux, except that it hardly ever did ripen Cabernet Sauvignon. The vineyards were mostly planted on heavy soil, and there was just too much summer rain, let alone the cyclones that stalked the coast most autumns, just as my daughter decided to come and interrupt our webinar. Hello, daughter. Do you want to learn about gimlet gravel? Because you're in the right place. But the cyclones, they stalked the coast most autumns, just as Cabernet was trying to ripen. But 9 miles in, do you like gimlet gravels or not? You don't have to say yes. Hello, this is daughter. Bonjour, daughter.
Morning, Sophia.
No, Popsy, no, you don't. I think the one rule in this household is that she knows a lot more about computers than I do. So I really don't want her to start playing with this computer. Never mind. I know slightly more than gimlet gravels, although she's got a very good palate. So let's just look at the gimlet gravels. It's an area. It's 9 miles inland, and it is completely barren. Popsy, if you're going to be a nuisance, I'm going to stand you on your head and put you in a dustbin. It's completely barren patch of gravels, and it's on an old riverbed. Now, this, you see, when I first went there, Pops, you leave it to later, Pops, because I'm still working, okay? I'm still working, okay? All right, I'm still working. You can be quiet, but you have to let me finish, and then we can have a little game. Okay, we'll have a little game in a minute.
We might be running over soon.
Let's just think. When I first went to New Zealand in 1987, and they showed me all these Cabernet type wines in Hawke's Bay, I kept saying these are not terribly good. Pops, I mean it, Pops. I'm gonna have to get if you don't behave yourself, you're out. Okay. And I took a drive inland, and I suddenly was going past this place which wasn't rich, heavy clay soils and kiwi fruit trees. It was completely nothing. It was a drag racing track, and it was a municipal dump, but I could see it was just pure gravel. I stopped the car, I leapt over the fence, and I said to these guys I was with, I said, if you want Bordeaux in New Zealand, it's here. And they said, oh, no, it's far too bony. You'll never grow anything there. I said, that's the point. You've got too much rain. It's warmer inland than it is by the sea. It's here. Well, God bless Steve Smith, because he was the person above all who took this seriously. And in 2001, I stood with him just after dawn on the top of a thing called Roy's Hill, looking at 800 hectares, which have been designated gimlet gravels. This great stony piece of land 9 miles inland from the sea, and Steve had managed to push through the gimlet gravels designation. So well done, Steve. Because the thing about Hawke's Bay is you've got tremendously high ultraviolet penetration, higher than any other populated area in the world. So that's really important. 9 miles inland, the temperatures are 3 degrees centigrade warmer 9 miles inland than they are out on the coast of Hawke's Bay. You get heat earlier in the day, and the stones hold on to it in the evening. And at 30 degrees depth, the sort of the roots are getting to work at 30 centimeters depth. The roots are getting to work, and the temperature is 5 degrees centigrade warmer at 30 centimeters down. That's fantastic. So when you've also got gravel like that, the cyclones come, the rains come. The cyclones mostly hit the coast worse than inland. But if the rains do come, they go straight through the gravel. So I must admit, I think that the Gimlet Gravels has done an astonishing job for New Zealand wine. It's given them a chance to create a full-bodied red personality, along with Central Otago doing another entirely different job down in the far south, to complement what Sauvignon Blanc and the whites do. And I must admit, I'm a tremendous supporter of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. It gets a really bad rap from a lot of people, and I just find myself saying, if it wasn't for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you guys wouldn't have a vineyard or a business. Please be a little bit kinder to Sauvignon Blanc. But I think this wine is tremendous, and it's interesting that it is only 13%, which I'm delighted to buy, because even in New Zealand there's this obsession to try and get to 14%. It's got a nice pH of 3.77, and interestingly, two things. Firstly, it's got Tempranillo in it, which is an excellent idea. Let's see what Tempranillo can do. And secondly, it's got 60%, 66% new oak, and it's American. You think, American new oak in New Zealand? Well, yes, and I think it can take it, and I think it adds a little coconut kind of quality to this wine, which gives a certain richness, because one of the things about gimlet gravels is that the wines are slightly austere, they're slightly linear, because there's not any flesh at all in the soil. The soil is bony beyond belief. So I think this whole idea shows Steve Smith again, really imaginative, thinking, okay, back to the future. Should we try a little bit of American oak here? A little bit of that coconutty toast might work. And I must admit, I think it works really well. And the sweetness comes out like carob. It comes out almost, and there's something which is perhaps to do with the Tempranillo, but it's a vegetal, savory quality. It's a little bit, to me, like sweet peppers, or even really well stewed carrots. Any of you oldsters who follow Elizabeth David, carrots Vichy is one of the great simple dishes that Elizabeth David did. Carrots sauteed with sugar and butter, basically. It's a heavenly mixture of richness and savory, and I get a bit of this in that. Well, I have to say, I've just noticed our clock, Kate.
We've run over. We always knew we would.
I think that I have thoroughly enjoyed these 6 wines this morning. It set me up for several hours now of I think it's Peppa Pig. She's well past that. I think it's going to the zip line. Going to the zip line and the swings. That sounds like it, doesn't it? Yes. Or possibly discussing Nietzsche. Do you want to discuss Nietzsche? No.
We're certainly going to run
discuss quantum mechanics. No. Do you want to discuss the periodic table? Do you want to just go on making faces at the screen? Yes, probably yes. Okay, right. I think it's really delightful, and I hope that the audience has enjoyed them as much as I have.
We haven't lost any as we've run over time, so thank you for that. Thank you everybody for your attention. As I say, we haven't had huge amounts of questions, but hopefully it's because you've been busy enjoying the wines and listening to Oz and his fabulous stories. Yeah, we've thoroughly enjoyed choosing these wines, haven't we, Oz, and chatting about them in the run. So
there's lots more where they came from.
Absolutely. So feel free to message us all to ask about the portfolio, any further questions, and yeah, I'd love to do that again one day. I think that was great fun. So thank you, Oz. Thank you, Sophia. We can go and play now, and thanks everybody for tuning in and listening. It's been fun.
Brilliant. Thanks everybody.
Cheers, Oz. Thank you.